3, 2, 1.
Here we go!
Three, two, one.
Here we go!
Well, today we come to this section of the teaching that honestly seems a little out of place. At first reading, it doesn't seem to be in the same zip code as the other things we've talked about. But Jesus seemed to think it was just as important. And it has to do with our words, the truth, honesty, and what God values. To get you thinking about this, what is the biggest lie that you know? Or maybe what's the most famous lie that you're aware of? It may be something that an athlete said. You might think about a performing artist who has lip synced, or for a lot of us, it might be something a politician said. Today, we're going to have to turn the focus inward and ask, where am I tempted to be dishonest, or deceive, or tell half-truths? And then the bigger question, why do I do that? Because can you imagine if, when we all said something, we didn't have to wonder, and we didn't have to check whether it was true or false, or even if it was mostly true or false. And this is what Jesus is about to set forth for us as the way of life in the kingdom. Matthew chapter 5, verse 33 says, "Again, you have heard that it was said to our ancestors." In other words, we're all familiar with this. Everyone knows the law and the commands in the Old Testament. You must not break your oath, but you must keep your oaths to the Lord. Now, Jesus chooses a real specific example from culture that even goes back to the Old Testament court system, in which people would take an oath, specifically an oath to God, that then became legally binding. It's like signing a contract today. There would be consequences for breaking that agreement. You would say, I swear to God, I'm going to pay this land off by 2025. And just speaking that out loud, they were legally bound. If you didn't keep your word, you could be kicked out, fined, or someone could execute justice. And Jesus is going to use this example to cast a bigger invitation to a life of honesty and truth. So that's the old way, that if you take an oath and attach God's name to it, you better keep it. And then he goes on to say this, but I tell you, don't take an oath at all. And then he gives us these four scenarios. Don't take an oath either by heaven because it's God's throne, or by the earth because it's his footstool, or by Jerusalem because it's the city of the great king. And do not swear by your head because you cannot make a single hair white or black. Now, this practice developed in which people wanted to be believed, but they didn't want to be legally bound. They would still take these oaths, but in order to make sure they allowed room to not have to deliver on that promise, they chose substitute words instead of God's name. And people did this all the time. They began swearing by something important to give more value or weight to what they were saying. It's like the ancient version of your kids saying, I promise I'll clean my room, and their fingers are crossed behind their back. And Jesus points out that swearing by heaven, he says, or earth, or the city, or your own head, it's all like swearing by God because he is the king over all. So be accountable for what comes out of your mouth. And as a reminder, we've seen this already in the teaching, that what comes out of your mouth comes from your heart. At the core of the teaching is this value of honesty and telling the truth. Simply don't break your word. Don't manipulate people with words. Don't promise if you don't intend to keep it. I came across an old sermon this week by a now deceased German pastor named Helmut Thielicke, and it's just so profound. I want to read it for you. He says, whenever I utter the formula, I swear by God, I'm really saying, now I'm going to mark off an area of absolute truth and put walls around it to cut it off from the muddy floods of untruthfulness and irresponsibility that ordinarily overruns my speech. In fact, he goes on, I'm saying even more than this. I'm saying that people are expecting me to lie from the start. And just because they're counting on my lying, I have to bring up these big guns of oaths and words of honor. The question it prompts me to ask then is, could we ever get to the point that what Jesus says next is a reality? He says, let your yes mean yes and your no mean no. Anything more than that is from the evil one. See, there's this new way where we don't need any of that because in the kingdom of Jesus, we value honesty and truth. In other words, if I say it out loud, it should be as good as done, and you can count on it being true. And Jesus finishes saying all of this deception comes from the evil one. Now, maybe he's just referring back to Genesis with the serpent or Satan who lied to Adam and Eve, told them they could be like God and they wouldn't die if they broke one of his commands. So they tried to deceive God, and then they hide and cover, and then they begin to blame each other. And it got them what they wanted in the short term, but it killed them in the long term. In John chapter 8, Jesus continues that thought by calling Satan the father of lies, and that there's no truth in him. But I also hold out this idea that maybe what Jesus is referring to is that this verbal manipulation of other people is truly an evil thing. I mean, maybe Jesus is really pushing back against using people in a way that manipulates and confuses their understanding of what's really going on. People in the kingdom of Jesus are to be so honest, there's no need to convince anyone that you might not be telling the truth. All you have to do, he says, is to say yes or no. Now, there's lots of ways we're less than truthful. We embellish, we're careless with information, we use deceit, we mislead, and we do this in our conversations where studies show that women tend to hide truth to avoid hurting someone's feelings, and men tend to hide the truth to impress. There's a lot of ways we do this, but the bigger question we have to ask is this: why? Why do I do all of this? And as we've been asking each week, what's going on in a person's heart that allows them to be dishonest, to even flat out lie, to shade the truth, or to deceive? What's going on in my heart that would let me be dishonest and untruthful? Well, it seems this comes from one of two places. One, we're dissatisfied with who we are, or two, we're dissatisfied with what we have. See, when I'm dissatisfied with who I am, I tend to try to make myself appear to be someone that I'm not, someone that you will like, someone that's more successful. When I'm dissatisfied with what I have, I tend to try to make myself appear to be someone who has more or different than I do. So I try to look better than I am, or that I have something that will make you accept me or think better of me. My struggle with truth will typically fall along these two lines: who I am or what I have. And when we struggle with truth, ultimately our real issue is a struggle with God. We're concerned about what people think about us, and we're concerned if God can handle something. So every lie or every mask or every misrepresentation, every deception or every shading of the truth can ultimately be traced back to my lack of trust in God. The issue is inside of us, and it's with God, but the harm and the damage is then done to other people. So maybe one of the best things we could do here is to stop and familiarize ourselves with the fact that God is always 100% truthful. He cannot lie. He always keeps his word. See, you are worthy to have been invited into his kingdom, and yet you cannot bring anything into it that will impress him. You're free to be the person that he's created you to be. So let's come to Jesus as we are, willing to receive from him, trusting that he makes us the kind of people we need to be. And all of this is possible as Jesus becomes the King of our hearts.